I know Te Pora has already asked people, if you haven't already, can you please put your name in the chat and your institution, or just have a look at what Te Pora's put there. We would really appreciate that. Just also to highlight, if you're not a member of OCIES yet, the membership is very, very decent. It's I don't know many societies that have an affordable membership fee, and now it's even more affordable because it's half price. And so if you want to join the society, go into the website and have a look at it. It'll have more details for you. As well, we have a feedback form. Ben, if you could, anything that I miss, team, please feel free to jump in. And
I'll post the feedback form and some links related to NERF at the end of the question period. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Okay, everyone. We're going to go through to our very first presenter. We have Dr. Emma Cunningham, a recent graduate from the University of Auckland, and she will be talking about the transition between intermediate and secondary school stories from Pasifika families. Malo, Emma. Emma, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Sorry about that. Okay, can you see the screen okay? Can you?
It looks great, Emma.
You can see the screen?
Yes, it's yep.
Great. Cool. So I'll sorry about that. Okay, I will begin. All right. Okay, so tēnā koutou katoa, ko Waitakere te maunga, ko te whau te awa, ko Pākehā te iwi, ko Emma toko ingoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. So first of all, thank you to OCIES for this opportunity to share my research. It's a really cool opportunity to be able to share about what I've been doing. So yeah, I recently completed my PhD, and so yeah, it's a great opportunity to talk a little bit about what I've been doing. All right, so the key purposes of the study that I did was to look at the important parts of successful transition for high school students, as well as looking at the role of the family and learning across that critical transition between Year 8 and Year 9. From the literature, we know that parental involvement is really important. We also know that it can have a strong and positive effect on student achievement, which continues into adolescence. What we know less about is what prompts specific types of involvement. So academic socialization is defined as parental beliefs and behaviours that influence children's school-related development, and it's a really important form of parental involvement. On its own, it's quite a complex phenomenon to kind of get your head around, as there are lots of different influences at play which shape it. But essentially, this framework provided me with a framework with which to disassemble the complexities, analyse them, and then try to make sense of what they looked like. Ecological systems theory shows development as occurring within a series of internested systems ranging from micro, the immediate family, right up to chrono, which is the effective time. The study focused primarily on the processes that take place within the family within a Pacific cultural context that contribute to children's academic development. So this particular transition from year 8 to year 9 is really important. It's a very important one, especially as there's a lot of evidence that shows that the likelihood of students staying in school throughout high school is heavily dependent on the success of this particular transition. Also, it can be quite challenging for children socially, academically, and emotionally, just with all of the different changes that take place. It's also important to look at and to learn more about the challenges and changes that occur for Pasifika students within this particular transition, as this is really helpful for educators and teachers who want to learn more about how to enhance educational outcomes for Pasifika students. As a Pākehā researcher, my positionality in relation to my participants was different to that of a Pasifika researcher. So the idea for this study was influenced by my experience as a teacher. So I've been an intermediate teacher for 14 years. So this particular transition is very interesting to me. Due to my years as a teacher, I've become very interested in parents' involvement in their children's learning, and I've seen firsthand the outcomes in student achievement when parents are on board with their kids' schooling and what's happening at school, etc. Within the study, I chose to adopt the position of learner, and essentially I was. So I am not an expert in Pacific cultures, and I don't have, personally, I didn't have a huge amount of successful high school experiences of my own. But what I did have with my participants was a deep interest in their lives, and we had the relational connections. I was known to my participants as I had taught either their children or their siblings, so we had that connection between us. We also both shared the commitment to understand more deeply about what was important for their children's success. Pacific research principles accentuate the importance of relationships with participants, particularly in regards to ensuring that the relationships are nurtured and cared for. From this perspective, a part of researcher positioning is what the researcher offers to the research community and their participants. So for me, the importance of building a relationship with my participants was really important, and I put a lot of effort into ensuring that I did that as well as I could. So just briefly, the methodology of the study. So I used ecological systems theory to shape the initial research questions, and I also used that to underpin the analysis of the data. Pacific research principles determined the choices that I made with my methodology. Pacific values were embedded into the design and the methods. I chose to use narrative inquiry to explore participants' stories within the individual family case studies. And the data that I used were semi-structured interviews and student drawings. I had 10 participating families in my study. 6 families were Samoan, 3 were Tongan, and 1 was Niuean. The study was qualitative and longitudinal, so I interviewed parents and their children over a 1-year period, so from the end of year 8 right across until the end of year 9. The purpose for the interviews was to gain an insight into both the experiences of parents and children at this important transition, as well as to build a picture of what was taking place within the home in regards to activities, etc. So the first interview and the second with parents, we talked about things like parents' expectations of their children's achievement. We talked about their own experiences of schooling, the activities that took place at home. And then at the end of year 9, I interviewed the parents again, and we talked about how parental support may have changed across that transition, how they navigated it, etc. For the children, I interviewed them twice. The first one was at the end of year 8. We talked about how they saw the role of their parents in their learning. We talked about how their parents supported them with their learning, and we talked about we discussed how they were getting prepared for high school. The second interview was at the end of year 8. We talked about their experience of high school and identified how they saw that their parents' involvement had changed. So it was actually really cool to be involved, for an entire year across that transition with the families. I mentioned that I use student drawings, and I just wanted to show you a couple of them. So the drawings that gave the young people time to think about and process what they wanted to share with me in the interview, and I was able to see visually what was important to them. So I asked them to create drawings prior to meeting with me, and I gave them kind of a brief outline of what I was looking for. They were really useful as prompts during the interviews, and just gave them time to think about what they wanted to share rather than coming in, in an interview situation with me cold. So it was quite I found it quite a useful approach. Okay, so the findings of the study, I'm just going to talk about 2 really. So the 2 that I'd like to focus on are the factors that impacted the transition to high school, as well as expressions of academic socialization that were occurring within the families that I was involved with. So one of the key, and running across the top there, I've got the parts of ecological systems theory, which are kind of addressed. So we've got the influence of change in time, culture, beliefs, faith, parents' workplaces, which didn't come up so much for me in this study, and mesosystem are the connections between settings, so the connections between home and school, and then the microsystem, which is the immediate home environment. So in regards to factors impacting the transition to high school, so parents talked about the quality of connections between settings, communication and support of teachers, as well as in regards to parents' historical life experience. So for many of the parents, they talked about how their own children's experience of school was quite different to what they had, due to parents having greater kind of understanding of what was happening at school. The students talked about change expectations at high school, greater amounts of homework, having higher kind of expectations with behaviour, etc. Looking across at the macro systems, so culture, faith, beliefs, the value for education and sacrifice, I'll touch on that in a minute, but those came through quite strongly in terms of the messages that were being passed on from the parents to their children about the importance of school and education. An important finding within the study was the expectations for success developing intergenerationally, and that occurred through things like storytelling, messages from the family, etc. That was quite a key finding within this study. So those were the 2 quite key findings. Now, I wanted to share a couple of quotes which supported some of the findings that I shared in this presentation. So the first one talks about what a number of the young people shared in relation to the role of their family and the historical stories as playing a part in motivating them to succeed. So for a number of the families that were second generation, quite a lot of them shared about what school had been like for them when they were young compared with what their own children's experiences of schooling were. So they contrasted quite significantly. Secondly, so high expectations for their children and their children's teachers. So this was a really key finding that came through with all of the participating families were the really high expectations that were held, and that came through in all of the interview data. This was evident as well in family practices at home, such as being really aware of what the schoolwork that was required, homework, the different ways that families celebrated success with their children as well. So that was a really key one. Thirdly, so factors impacting the transition to high school. For a number of the parents who were second generation, they talked about some of the struggles that they'd had at school as their parents who had not been as confident in engaging with the school as they were. So those particular parents talked about how their own children's experiences of school were completely different and transformed from just because the second generation parents had a lot more understanding and of what was required at school compared with their own parents. Okay. So lastly, the conclusions that came through from the study were the really strong role of intergenerational expectations. It's important for teachers to know the impact of intergenerational expectations for success on their students' identity as learners. So the results of the study may be helpful for teachers or school leaders who seek ways to work collaboratively with their parent communities in the interest of achievement of Pacific students. So the findings are a reminder of the importance of teachers valuing the cultural strengths of their students. It also adds to what we know about the experience of Pasifika students across this really important transition, which is really useful for educators in terms of planning forward. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Emma.
Thanks.
All our questions will be saved till the end of the very last presentation. So if you have questions for Emma, I'm sure she'll appreciate them when we get to the end of the third. And we're going to go across now to Noah Romero from the University of Auckland, and his talk is going to be on critical unschooling, pedagogy and praxis. Malo Noah.
Thank you, David. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So I don't mean to like bait and switch or anything, but I wanted to change up. There's a little switch in what I'm doing today, not deviating from the abstract a little bit, but I think in a generative and good way in light of recent events in my research and life. But first, te pepeha, so kia ora tātou, ko Mount Diablo te maunga, ko San Francisco Bay te awa, no San Francisco aho, ko Romero taku whānau, ko Noah taku ingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, and apologies for the pronunciation from California. All right, so my research is about unschooling, in particular critical unschooling, which means relational and resurgent approaches to self-directed education, informal learning, and I'm particularly interested in the ways by which unschooling parents and educators through the practice of unschooling learn what's called the Filipino concept of kapwa, which is shared identity, and out of recognition of that shared identity, a knowledge of our responsibilities to one another. So today I want to share a little story about the inspiration for that research, which is my tupuna, my grandmother, pictured here on the left. And her name is, her stage name, her name in that photo is Mila del Sol, but she was born Clarita Rivera Villarba in Tondo, Manila, in 1921. She left school. She's something of a proto-unschooler. That's why she's the inspiration for this research. She left school at the age of 12 in 1934 to support her ailing mother and siblings. And my grandmother's early life was marked by abject poverty. She and her siblings sifted through rubbish at the local landfill for items they could either reuse or resell. And at the age of 16, she began acting professionally and was cast in her first leading role, that of Gia, in the 1939 musical Ecological, which translates to My Love. So at the premiere, Manuel Quezon, who was the president of the Philippine Republic at the time, demanded that Gia dine with him and the First Lady at Malacanang Palace, which is the presidential palace. So the film staff went looking for my grandmother to deliver this invitation, to deliver this news, and they couldn't find her. They found her in the very back of the theater. So she watched the premiere of her film in the cheap seats with the people from her neighborhood, and she never stopped identifying as a girl from Tondo. My grandmother was given the stage name Mila del Sol, which is short for Milagros del Sol, or Miracle of the Sun. Director gave her that name because he said that whenever she came on set, the clouds would part. And my grandmother explained that that's more of a practical miracle, because if the clouds were parted, that meant the lighting was good and her takes would be faster and cheaper. So she got a lot of work because of that. This was the 30s and 40s. It was a real belief. That her career in movies spanned 6 decades, but from 1940 to 1952, she starred in over 40 films, and that earned her the title Queen of the Golden Age of Philippine cinema. My cousins, siblings, and I all called our grandmother Lulay, which is a portmanteau of the word Lola, which means grandmother, and Inay, which means mother, that she came up with herself. Within our family, Lulay was known for her work ethic, her old world elegance, her Christian faith, her frugality, and her crass sense of humor. But to me, her most striking trait was her love of learning. No form of knowledge seemed too advanced or esoteric for her to grasp. She took courses at Los Angeles City College after she retired from acting. She learned to speak Spanish when she was in her 80s and would sing Mexican corridos with her live-in caregiver. In a tribute video for her 93rd birthday, which she demanded be called Lulay's 45th birthday, one of my nephews said that his favorite thing about his great-grandmother is that she learned how to use an iPad and play games with them, and I quote him, "even though she is old." I hope these jokes are landing. I can't tell. This is my life. For a 1930s movie star and devout Catholic, Lulay had a surprising affinity for hyperlocal slang and toilet humor. Her nickname for any male subordinate, including my father and uncles, was bayag, which literally means, pardon the crudeness, but it's my grandmother, literally means ballsack. That's what she called my dad and uncles. She had a knack for inventing dirty words that captured the objects they signified in ways that were artful and even profound. Lulay-isms like chunglay, urine, chali, feces, batungloy, penis, mulut, sex, or foreplay all have a synesthetic quality that imbues them with vitality, dynamism, and wit that I think are better than the real words. These words, despite their crudeness, demonstrated contemplative and observant inventor, which my grandmother was. Hearing these words as an angsty teenager reminded me not to take everything so seriously all the time, that the things we revile, dread, or think are taboo are often silly. Lulay's neologisms reminded me that our creative drives are more powerful than our fears. It wasn't until I enrolled in a Tagalog course at the the University of San Francisco at the age of 21 that I learned that these were not real words. Lulai died at the age of 97 on November 10th, 2020. I recognize that eulogizing my grandmother is an odd choice for a research agenda about the transformative impact of alternative education, but my grandmother was in many ways the type of person that folks like John Holt and A.S. Neal and Ivan Illich hoped that their formulations of autonomous education would produce. She's the type of person I hope unschooling will enable me and my children to become. Lulai brought people together, be they street vendors, clergy, business people, artists, caregivers, politicians, or presidents. An examination of her professional career as an actress, business owner, philanthropist might portray her as someone who defined her goals, gained the skills needed to achieve them, and let no obstacle stand in her way. But the memories of those who loved her most suggest that the meaning of my grandmother's life and work went well beyond the scope of her accomplishments. Lulai saw herself in others, let others see themselves in her, and inspired everyone in her orbit to care for one another as if they were one and the same. Ivan Illich would call this type of person an Epimethean man, or one who collaborates with their Promethean brother in the lighting of the fire and the shaping of iron, but who does so to enhance their ability to tend and care and wait upon the other. Illich argued that the development of Epimethean men and women should be the goal of every educational endeavor. Lulai became an Epimethean woman because she never stopped engaging with and appreciating the other. She didn't cling to one correct way of doing things or interpreting information or moving about the world. As a child, I remembered her apartment walls being covered with newspaper clippings from her glory days. But I also remember that my grandmother never talked about herself. She spent more time asking questions, checking in on her loved ones, telling jokes, and making us laugh. One of her Christmas presents to me was a 1 gallon bucket filled with lychee gummies. I don't know if anyone remembers those, but they're gelatinous candy that they stopped making because kids choked to death eating them. But Lulai didn't know that. She just knew that I liked them, and she wanted me to have as many of them as possible. What Lulai cared about most was that her home was a happy place. She lived in pursuit of kagandahan na loob, a desire to maintain, uplift, and beautify the inner lives of those with whom she interacted. It's in this respect that Lulai embodied the Platonic ideal of an unschooling educator, or any educator. Her refusal to disengage made it so that she never stopped learning. She reminded my family members that we were no different from one another because we all came from her. After the 9th day of Lulai's novena, which is a traditional 9-day funeral, basically 9 days of prayers and gathering after death in the Filipino community, I went to bed missing my grandmother. But I was woken up by my own children and saw my grandmother in their wide-eyed, grinning faces. And thereafter came a familiar feeling, that of feeling at peace in Lulai's presence. Thank you all.
Aloha Bitanoa. Beautifully told. In Polynesia, there's a concept that we use, it's called mawhana. Very mawhana.
Appreciate that, David. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead now to Maggie, Dr. Maggie Margaret Flavell from Victoria University of Wellington. Her talk will be on building collaboration and homeschool partnerships to support secondary Pacific students. Mahalo pita Maggie.
Okay. There we are. That screen's visible, isn't it? Thank you to the beautiful presenters. I hope that I can say something equally stimulating. I'm not sure, but I'll do my best. So tēnā koutou katoa, talofa lava, and malo alele. So thank you for the opportunity to present today. Yes, I like to be called Maggie. That's my, although I'm formerly Margaret. And yes, I finished my PhD last year at Victoria University and graduated in December. And then with 2020 being a little bit of an unusual year, I'm now looking ahead to 2021 to see in what way I can put to good use some of what I've learned in my study. And so I'm using this presentation today to help me gather my ideas as I look ahead and think about a practical application for this research. So I'm not doing quite the same detail, but understand not the same level of storytelling as Noah, but still. So my topic was exploring homeschool partnerships for secondary Pacific students. And the more that I engaged in this topic, the clearer it came to me that schools would really benefit from developing collaborative practices in their relationships with families. Like Emma, I was a school teacher, and I really valued and I wanted to work closely with Pacific families, but I didn't necessarily know how to go about it, and that stepped me onto the road of this research. So yeah, on the theme of collaboration, oh, I can't move my slides. How do I get to the next one? There we are. Oh, oops, now how do I go back? Right, so that's what I'll run through today. I'd like to talk about the action plan that the Ministry of Education have brought out, just published, and then a little brief focus on my findings and draw on some literature that I used for my research so that I can bring you to the methodology I used based on Appreciative Inquiry, because I think it could become a practical tool for developing the kind of collaborative partnerships that I have actually envisaged in this action plan. So let's see how I go on. So the action plan really conveys a very clear message for collaborative partnerships between educators and Pacific families. And I thought I'd just put in this quote from the former Associate Minister of Education, Jenny Salesa, because that's what she said. Put simply, about Pacific communities being essential partners in the design and delivery of our learning system. And the action plan has got 5 shifts, but one of them is to work reciprocally with diverse communities to respond to unmet needs. And here's another one about partnership, so that schools to partner together with teachers, leaders and educational aspirations, so that aspirations, professionals, so that aspirations for learning and employment can be met. And I just thought I'd pause on the language here. We've had essential partners being used, the word reciprocally. And often researchers, they talk about relationships. There's the word to describe how parents become engaged or involved in their children's education. But Paul, Booking and Campbell, they really like the word partnership, because then that can emphasize the qualities like collaboration, equity, two-way dialogue, the kind of things that are really essential for successful homeschool interactions. So what I'll just do is just say a couple of words, not much detail, a couple of words on my study, which was a qualitative case study. And I set up from a strength-based perspective to find out good practice in how schools build relationships with their Pacific families in order to support successful Pacific learners. And I focus on a town in the North Island of New Zealand with 2 secondary schools where about 10% of the student population identified as Pacific. And I met with about 60 participants of parents, community members, teachers and students. And then just before my next slide, my last little point I want to make is just to take a moment to express my appreciation for the help I received, because I had tremendous help from people within the Pacific communities of the town, and without their help I would never have been able to have made any inroads at all. So thank you to them. So just a little bit about my findings. On this idea of collaboration, that's really exactly what participants were saying, that they confirmed the importance of strong relationships between home and school so that students' learning needs and career aspirations are catered for. That's, from parents, teachers, students alike. And this, for example, this parent talked about really wanting good quality dialogue between home and school, so that what can be provided for the student is wraparound support. I really like that phrase. But there was some variation in what the different groups of participants prioritised. So parents tended to emphasise the importance of involving family in decisions relating to their child's education. And teachers obviously wanted to work closely with family, but they emphasised the needs and interests of the students. And the students really valued any help that they received. I think probably like Emma research picked up, that all the help was fantastic, but they actually emphasised personal responsibility. So the thing is that if, you know, like my study, when an opportunity for listening is provided, then all these different perspectives come to light. But the question is, how can schools go about creating partnerships with families that are genuinely collaborative and inclusive in nature, and that gives space to hear all these different perspectives? And my study found examples of, you know, many examples of excellent practice and teacher commitment to relationship building with specific families. But if schools don't support relationships that align with specific values, then family members, it's my little diagram, family members can feel alienated from the decision-making processes that affect their children. So I'll just put my quick story in now. And this was told to me by some aunties and by teachers, and it had happened at the school the year before that I was doing my field work. And a particular Pacific boy was really struggling with his behaviour in class, and so having tried to not very successfully to work things out with parents, a member of the senior leadership team removed him from class and was giving him one-to-one tuition. So anyway, things were getting serious, so a meeting was called to see if the child had a future in the school. But then the whole family turned up, and they'd got this room ready, but there wasn't enough space in the room, there weren't enough chairs. It was a real scrabble to get everybody in, and people were taking time off work. So the school was a little bit shocked to see so many people there. And then the family was a bit shocked, because they said, and all this has been going on? Why didn't you tell us earlier? We know the parents are struggling, but if you told us, you'd have had all the support you needed. So, you know, I think, you know, that basically the family had resorted just to turning out in their numbers, because that seemed to them the only way they knew to make their voices heard in a school system that didn't appear to be able to, you know, listen in the way they wanted. So that was just my little example. So, so for this presentation, I went back to look at some of my literature to help me think about how schools can really engage with families in a way that collaboration just, you know, naturally happens. And so I refreshed myself on this project, Included, which was a large-scale project involving 120 schools across Europe. It was conducted between 2006 and 2011, but the work is actually carried on under this label, Successful Education Actions for All, and there's a website for it. And so the idea was it drew on critical pedagogy to address social cohesion, finding ways to engage groups of people who might otherwise feel marginalised in society. And one way they went about doing it was through engaging family and community in education, and this was their conclusion. When schools value family and community participation in decision-making, academic results increase. And basically what they did was the researchers would go into schools and implement a number of planned phases that developed skills and opportunities for students, the families and the teachers to work together and engage in decision-making processes. So that just leads me to, it's not unlike actually the research that I conducted. So, my methodology was based on appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is a kind of action research which seeks out how to create change by recognizing and building on what's working well. So anyway, there are these different phases, and the first phase is the D, discovery. So a discover of what's working well. So for example, in homeschool relationships, I asked my participants for stories of success. So I've got my dog here trying to take part. And then for dream, I asked participants what they would really like to see, as in what would be perfect in the ideal world. So sorry, it's just making me giggle. I'll tell you in a minute why. The more inclusive you are at this stage, the more you can discover a range of, diverse and innovative and creative ideas. And because this process encourages engagement, then any subsequent decisions are, hopefully, built around inclusion and collaboration. And then the design phase is where you bring all the different voices together to create a collective vision. And I've just given an example from the action plan. Our vision is that diverse, specific learners and their families are safe, valued and equipped to achieve their education aspirations. And then once you've got the design, then you can go into the destiny or delivery phase, where you can actually carry out particular plans and actions. So if you could imagine, for example, if members from the Pacific communities had been brought in to work with school leaders and teachers and students, then these people could go back into the communities and undertake specific actions that align with the collective vision that has been created. And so because I was a researcher and not in a leadership role, I couldn't coordinate, well, I didn't feel I could coordinate this design destiny phase, but I did compile a written report with collaborations. So in particular, I worked very closely with my cultural advisor, who was a leader from the Samoan community. And then she came with me and supported me while we presented the report to the schools, so that if they wanted to, they could act on any recommendations. So I'll just, so just to my last slide then. So just to summarise, I actually think that you could use this approach to appreciative inquiry process and develop it to something that you could go into schools with to support the reviewing and the developing of homeschool partnerships. And I'll just mention a couple of plus points. One is that it actually provides structure for engaging family and community voice, which is what the Included project did, and that made a positive difference. And the other is that it gives that crucial, it prioritizes space for relationship building, which is absolutely crucial if you're going to work successfully with specific families. But I also see some tensions that it might put schools off as, oh, is it too time consuming or too costly? And the risk is that it could give the illusion of collaboration whilst the decision-making powers still remain the school structure. However, the risk of not trying out something like this is that then nothing changes, and our attention needs to be on what we can do now to help the shifts in the action plan come to fruition. Thank you. Kia
Hello, Peter Maggie. Thank you for your research with us. We're going to move into Q&A. This is an opportunity for people to ask questions about the 3 presentations today. Hello.
I have a question. Can I jump in there?
Thank you, Bix.
Cool, right. Well, thank you to you all, Emma, Noah, Maggie, for those great presentations. really great. And what I enjoyed too was, as I was listening to each of them, was thinking about the connections between. And so I guess my question is probably for all three of you, but maybe starting with Emma. I was just reflecting on some of what Maggie shared around the family beyond parents, and Noah's story also obviously of his grandmother. And I think I got it right that you mostly talked with parents of the students in your study, and I was just wondering whether, to what extent that broader family network or community network kind of came into your findings. And yeah, so that's my main question.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, absolutely. So most of my interviews took place at the families' homes, and quite often there were aunties, uncles, nanas at home as well. And so it was a really lovely part of the interview process, was that quite often aunties, uncles, nanas would jump in and share their parts of the story as well. So I got to, I think for two of my family's mums there, for the participants' parents, the mums and dads were living there as well, and quite often they'd join in as well, and I'd get to hear their part of their contribution to it as well. So definitely there was greater family involvement. Yeah.
Thanks, Emma. So then I guess a follow-up question to that for you and also for Maggie is then what does that mean for schools who I think, at least in my experience, still think very much in terms of nuclear families and parental engagement, and our systems and structures are often set up so that it's, you know, only parents can give consent to things, or only parents are invited to certain events. Like what would you be saying to schools and to our wider kind of education systems to respond to?
Yeah. Can I answer that, Emma, or do you want to?
Yeah, go, Maggie.
Right, yeah. No, that's exactly what came out in my study, was that that was what's frustrating so much to the parents and community leaders that I was speaking with, that the nuclear system was really not understanding the values of the community and how decisions that child made. There was a really, I can't think of the quotes off the top of my head, but I had quite a few quotes of them saying that it's not just, you know, it isn't just us, it isn't just the student, it isn't just the parents, it's way wider than that. And so it's how, and I could understand, like the story I told, then obviously, you know, you've got the whole confidentiality issues. You know, the school can't just go talking about one student to anybody. And so it's a very, very challenging situation for them, because they've still got to respect confidentiality, but they still need to be able to appreciate the wider network of support that folds around that child. So it is about making structural change. I'm not sure exactly what that structural change would look like, but it would be contextualized within each school. And that's why I come back to like the approach that I was thinking of, that something where you could really open debate and encourage, you know, real collaborative discussion, and for a school to feel comfortable at allowing decision-making process to go beyond, you know, what might happen, you know, in the leadership team, so that decisions about those kind of decisions can be made according to the circumstances. That might be a bit of a waffly answer, but along those lines anyway. Somebody else can qualify it.
Yeah, that's great. It's a really good point.
This is Jeremy with the University of the South Pacific in Fiji. I think one of the things I said in one of our postgraduate meetings, and we were listening to students presenting in their oral presentations for their proposals. And one of the things I mentioned is that all the research doesn't have to look for some sort of, because all the time people come in with proposals looking for a deficit there or some sort of problem there needs to be solved and so forth. And things can be structured and framed around positive, appreciative frameworks instead of trying to look for some sort of fault, some sort of problem somewhere there all the time. Even though that's all right also, but sometimes if it's framed negatively all the time, it becomes a problem also. I come from a sports background in terms of table tennis, and one of the courses I did online the other month was on sports, positive sports coaching, and it's based on positive psychology, because too often we try to give negative, not negative, but you tend to judge athletes and performance according to negative terms, instead of working and building on from the child or the athlete or the performer's strength and strength base. So I think going into communities like you're doing, I think is a very good thing from a positive, appreciative, strength-based paradigm. Thanks.
Can I make
Maggie? Yes, Maggie.
Yeah. So just one of the things that was very clear. I mean, I know that this, will be obvious to many other people, but it was just a learning point for me. Because if you look at literature on the engagement of Pacific families in education, it often just focuses on, although these barriers, they're very busy working, or they don't understand the schools, or all this sort of thing. But when you engage with the community and you find out what's going on, you discover there's such a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And that it was very clear that there were people who I was meeting with who had a very good understanding of the school systems, and they gave a lot of time up to work with teachers and students, and they had solutions up their sleeve too. So it's like the answer. So school, it just, I might be simplifying this a little bit, but sometimes you felt that schools was scrabbling about trying to come up with solutions when the solutions are already known. It's just that those who've got the solutions haven't necessarily got the voice or the opportunity to influence the decisions. And so, yes, that's why. Anyway, but just really consolidating what Jeremy is saying, that from an appreciative perspective, it's about including everybody who's got the answers so that they can participate in promoting, success for the students.
Thank you, Maggie. Adiola, I can't seem to find your question. Are you able to? Hi, Adiola.
Yes, I can. Hi. So really great presentations. And I've just got a question for Emma. Because of COVID, I'm having to rethink all of my methods. And so I was really interested when you talked about the fact that you'd use student drawings. And I was just hoping you could unpack a bit how you did that. For example, did you have some type of instructions that you sent out, which was setting out exactly what you wanted students to do, and how did you explain that to them? And if you've got the time, was there a particular analysis framework that you used just to try and to analyze the drawings?
Thank you. Yeah. So for me, I wanted to use the drawings as prompts for the interviews. So I've done a lot of reading around interviewing with adolescents, and quite often it can be quite intimidating for kids to sit down in a formal situation and, talk with an interviewer. So I was looking for a way to kind of break that barrier, I guess, and create like a bit of an icebreaker. So what I did was so once I'd met with the kids and explained about the research, so their parents had already assented to their involvement, I said, okay guys, now these are a list of questions that I'm really interested in. So I'm interested in the types of activities you do at home with your families. I'm interested in how do you see your mum and dad and your wider family, how are they involved in your learning? What's important to you at school? I want you to have a little think about that and then do a little picture for me, maybe a poster, it could be any kind of presentation, go away and then bring that back with you when we have the interview. So, and that was all written down for them. I think I had maybe 4 questions. So the kids went away, they did their little drawings, and there was huge variation in the drawings. Like I showed you 2 of the really, really good ones. Some of them were quite lacking in detail, but the ones that they had put a lot of effort into, it really made the interview flow quite well, because, for example, I could say, oh, okay, well, there's this part on the picture, can you tell me more about that? Or what did you mean when you wrote these words, etc. So for me, I found them to be really, really useful. What I also did, I didn't talk about this in my presentation, but I actually kept their drawings. And then when I met them 1 year later at the end of year 8, I brought the drawings with me, and I said, so here's this picture that you did for me in year 8 about the role of your family, about the activities you're doing at home. Has anything changed? Could you tell me, has anything changed? And then they annotated those for me. So they drew or wrote on things that had changed. Well, yeah, mum actually is on my case a lot more about homework now because I've got a lot more. Or no, my family hasn't changed so much. So they proved to be really, really important. And basically, I didn't do much of analysis as such with them. However, I just found that they were really useful prompts, and they were great. I wrote about it in my thesis about them being really good kind of barrier breakers, really, a bit of an icebreaker, because it is hard for kids to sit down. I mean, I did know a lot of them because I taught their siblings, or I knew their families because I've been in the school for a long time, but it's still a little bit scary to sit down and talk about this kind of stuff. And the pictures just served as a great sort of prompt, I guess. Yeah.
No, thanks. And that's a really good idea, to bring them back a year later and then get the students to annotate. So it's these types of insights that it's really good to see how people are using these methods. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, this is a question for Noah. I know with a lot of the work that Pierre Bourdieu has produced, and even some scholars in New Zealand have tried to unpack how schools perpetuate certain types of knowledge, predominantly dominant Western knowledge and practices. What I see in your presentations is a real critical, not only yours, Noah, but as well as Emma and Maggie, is a critical, going into there and really looking at the systemic things that are happening in schools. And you're producing some of the alternatives to understand, home knowledges, home partnerships. But Noah, my question to you is around self-directed education, which is in your abstract. So STE, and then you had something around divorcing education from coloniality. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely, and appreciate the question, David. This actually, Jeremy's comment actually kind of is stimulating in that regard, because I do come from a tradition I come from a critical pedagogy tradition. Filipino American studies, Asian American studies is very critical, and oftentimes it kind of gets fixated on that criticality to the point of, and this is kind of like it's like shaky ground to walk on, because it's super important to understand the issues and the historical context and the traumas that minoritized people live through. But as a Filipino person, as an immigrant, I kind of know those already. and I got to a point where I was kind of tired of writing about myself in that way all the time. And looking at my grandmother's story, it's like, this is a Filipino woman, a poor Filipino woman, but her story doesn't end there. There's a standard story that is ascribed to those labels, poor Filipino woman. But to stop it there, to stop looking at that point, you miss out on that whole 85 years of life and vitality and relationality and living. So to the point of SDE, when I came up with this writing around critical unschooling, it was around not to take it so far back, but having my own kids and thinking of how we wanted to educate them and bring them up, and having that sort of Bowles and Gintis, social Antonio Gramsci, like kind of negative perception of schooling, and then having gone through school and still being in school, kind of having some personal experience to lend credence to those ideas as well. We just kind of wanted to raise our kids differently. But then a lot of the discourse around unschooling, we're kind of seeing the same discourses in schooling. Marketization, corporatization, neoliberalism, you're seeing those same sort of mentalities even in the alternative education space. And I didn't want to like blame anybody or cast judgment on anybody. It's just the idea that there are certain historical movements, economic persuasions that are not being analyzed in the practice of unschooling, of homeschooling, of doing education differently. Like, how different is it? So I wanted to have something out there that put the critique right there. Like, if you want to do unschooling in a way that delivers on what it's supposed to do, of creating like this epimethean person, this person who moves around the world rhizomatically, making connections and building, like weaving people and non-human others together in search of something stronger. If you really want to do that with unschooling, it's got to be critical. And here's the things we can think about when doing that. But then you also have to kind of walk the line a little bit of not being too critical, and where you're essentializing people, like conscripting them to their circumstances. But just that kind of thinking is a lot more generative, a lot more interesting than that sort of dialectical oppressor-oppressed dynamic, Filipino, non-Filipino, immigrant, non-immigrant, and then sort of placing like value judgments based on those categories. So my whole journey of researching self-directed education and researching unschooling has kind of like been decolonizing for myself, more so than, you know, my articles and presentations and stuff are like, this is how you can decolonize or how you can be anti-racist. But really the impact has been a personal one. It's been a journey of discovery. And part of that has been kind of decentering the colonizer in that working toward resurgence. And it's been great. I wish it was easier. I wish you could just put everyone in a category and then define who's the bad guy and who's the good guy and what we need to do to beat the bad guy. But it doesn't work that way. And those affirmative strengths-based pedagogies and methodologies that's it. I think that's the way forward.
Thank you, Noah. When you were talking, you reminded me of the work that Konai Helu Salmon, who was a Tongan scholar based in the Pacific. And she looked at the value of informal knowledge or informal education as being essential to Tongan students, and other Pacific scholars did the same thing, and trying to speak back to the very, strict and stringent ways that schools themselves expect of students. So very disruptive, and it's good. Thank you.
If I might add another point to that, it's kind of like, it just goes to show how important the Pacific and Indigenous perspectives are just on that debate of what is informal education, because a lot of times in the West it's dichotomized as well to learning and play, work and play. But in like in Yucatec Maya societies, like how children learned was like working. They contribute, they're equal contributors to the community. They're no less than, or they're not, because of their stature or age, considered to be less than capable of valuably contributing to the community that the adults are. And it's not that they have to do the same exact labor. It's just that they contribute, their contributions are equally valuable in different ways. and they can't be kind of diminished just because of what their body looks like at the time they're doing it. So just, yeah, those kinds of conversations, even at that level, are important to have here in New Zealand and everywhere. Thank you.
Hello, Peter. Any other questions?
I've got a super general one. What are you all going to do next?
That's a really good question, Sonia. I'm
Just
still trying to
be emerging researcher.
I'm still trying to figure that part out right now. I am looking for a position where I can use my experience as a teacher as well as the work that I have used. I have not been successful yet, but I am looking. I'm also really keen to publish and collaborate, and this year has kind of been about getting the PhD done, wrapped up, and sending it on its way, and now I can kind of spend more time on writing and creating. So that's something that I'd really love to focus on. And while I've got the floor, I'd just like to say thank you so much for everyone being here, and thank you for the organisers for giving us the space to share. It's a really awesome privilege to be able to do this, so thank you.
Oh.
Noah, what are you doing next?
I think Maggie started talking.
No, you go now.
Okay. Well, yeah, I want to echo Emma's sentiments and thank the organizers and the attendees for being here. It's really heartening and sacred to share space with you. I really appreciate it and don't take that responsibility lightly. I've got to write this thing. I can talk about it all till the cows come home, but I've got to put the words. I've got to get those 75,000 words down. 75,000 good words. Key word there. So the first thing is I'm off on holiday for the next week and a half. So no being critical allowed. I'm just kidding. That never stops. But no stressing out about it. I'm gonna finally get out of Auckland a little bit and see the Waikato and Rotorua and Mount Maunganui, and I'm excited to do all that stuff with my kids and my partner. And then from there, it's pedal to the metal, I think.
Okay. Okay, so I'm a little bit like Emma, in fact, in trying to work out what next. So I have been doing some article writing, and so that's just trying to follow that through to get something published. And I did actually look for some funding, and I connected with the school to see if I could do a little action research project there. And I got the go-ahead from the school, but I didn't receive the funding. And they said that it was more, they were really more interested in handing out community funding, and they said I should have gone to the Ministry of Education. And then afterwards I realised, or somebody pointed out, that there was funding attached to the action plan, but by the time I realised that it was available, I wasn't ready, basically. So I guess I probably need a little. Do I need confidence? Confidence, or a bit more, or some drive. I probably need a bit of drive. That's the word. To just remember that I did the PhD for a reason, to be of value and support, support education, and so not to just sit and be lazy about it. And so I think next year will be, again, connecting with the school or another school and looking for funding to see whether I can actually make something practical happen as a consequence of the study.
Malo, Peter, given the time, as on behalf of the team, we would really like to and the OCIES leadership. Let me not forget that. On behalf of the OCIES leadership, as well as our NERF team, we thank our presenters, our amazing presenters, for sharing their work. We also thank all the audience for joining us today. And we really want to encourage the speakers to continue to engage and share your work with our community, because it is a good way of sharing it and spreading it. I have taken some really good learnings and insights from your own work, and also our audience. The NERF space is a conducive space, and we're really trying to find ways to take this forward and continue the mentoring for our early career. So we thank you, everyone. Just before we go, Ben would have posted up some links. So those links are specific to NERF. There's a NERF FB page. There is also a NERF LinkedIn. There is a survey that if you can please give us some feedback. And also, finally, there is an AGM at 1 o'clock today. Which is not far away. If you are available, please join us. It is a really good space to find your niche and to work together with others to build your research and collaborate. So thank you very much. Malo au vito o whawege mo mauha aho o whawhiawhia. Hogad ho mo ngā ue I he mala e whekumi. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a blessed day and keep well. See you at 1 o'clock at the AGM.
Thank you very much for all the help.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you, Jeremy. Hi, Larissa. Is it Larissa? Oh, yeah.
Hi. Hi, David.
How are you?
Good.
Yeah.
Yes, that's Larissa.
Oh, okay. Will you join us at 1 p.m. for the AGM?
Yeah, looks like.
We'll see you then, Larissa. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Do we want to stop recording for this one?